Namaste.
Namaste.
Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna.
Today we're going to concentrate on verses 16 to 23 of chapter 2. If you remember last time, we focused on the verses before that. And one of the verses in 2:14, Bhagwan started to refer to things that are temporary in nature. And these, he says, are things like the contact of our senses with their sense objects. These, he says, are temporary. Now he's going on to describe what he considers is transient, and he will later move on to what is permanent. So let's look at verse 16.
Yes. Verse 16. Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah, ubhayorapi drashtontas tvanayo tattvadarshibhi. So now Bhagavan says, na asatah vidyate bhavaha. Asatah, which is temporary or which is untruthfulness, which Bhagavan says, bhavaha na vidyate. So what is the temporary? It's Bhagavan says it doesn't exist or it is not there. And na abhavaha vidyate sataha. But whatever the sataha, sat means satya, sat means truthful, sat means the reality. Bhagavan says asat sataha abhavaha na vidyate. So sat means truthfulness, which we want, which cannot be invisible. And now he says ubhayorapi drashtantas tvanayo tattvadarshibhi. The word Bhagavan is using here, beautiful word, which is tattvadarshi. Tattvadarshi means who has realized or who has understood the entities, tattvas. Bhagavan says ubhayoho api, in both drashta, which is seen, there is no difference for tattvadarshibhi. Bhagavan says there is no difference for the person who has understood the entities. So that is the word meaning.
You want to explain more textly or what mean?
Yeah, I can go ahead. Yeah. So, thank you for reminding you. So, Tattvadarshi Vihi, in Tattvas, there are 24 Tattvas, and it starts with Mula Prakriti, then Mahad, Buddhi, Mahad Buddhi, Ahankar. So, Mula Prakriti, Mula Prakriti has two sides. One is Vyakta, second is Avyakta. Vyakta, which is visible, and Avyakta, which is invisible. Then it says Mahad Buddhi, which we know is intellect. Then Ahankara. So usually word Ahankara we translate as ego, but it is not ego, it is identity. So Ahankara means identity. So first Mula Prakriti, then second is Mahad Buddhi, third is Ahankar, then fourth is Manas, which is mind. And then the four are divided as a 5, which is 5 the organs of senses, 5 their objects. So organs of senses, as we know, eyes, ear, nose, tongue, and skin, they're objects. And there are 5 more, which is which we call elements, which is space, water, fire, air, and wind. So these are 4, which is in 5, 5 senses, 5 limbs of actions, 5 the objects, and 5 elements. With that, so those are 20, and then Mahabuddhi, Mula Prakriti, Manas, and Ahankar. So altogether 24. So our Guruji used to say that who is beyond 24 called Paramatma. So Paramatma word, when we make it in numerical, Paramatma becomes 24, and which is beyond 24, which we call Paramatma. So who understood that this 24, that called Tattvadarshi. Yeah.
So in English it says, of the transient, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, there is no cessation. This has verily been observed and concluded by the seers of the truth after studying the nature of the attributes of creation. Now we'll examine that statement with a little bit of care, because it seems that what Bhagavan is saying is perfectly obvious. Of the transient, there's no endurance. Well, obviously, if it's transient, non-permanent, then there's no endurance. And if it is eternal, then it can't cease. We'll examine what exactly does he mean by that. Now, Jiniti just explained what is meant by the 24 tattvas or elements or attributes of creation. It's important to understand that the word elements in this context in English is not referring to the periodic table. That's not the meaning. It means the 24 attributes that adequately describe our cosmos. So, this is merely a description that is relevant to our planet, 24. On other planets, it may well be there are different organs, limbs, and senses, in which case the number 24 may be 26, it may be 22, we don't know. So this is quite specific to our planet, maybe our solar system. However, having said that, there is increasing evidence that the building blocks of life on Earth were seeded by meteorite impacts. Now, in an experiment, a chemist at an institute in Prague used a high-powered laser beam to try to duplicate the high temperatures and pressures produced when an asteroid or comet slams into the Earth. Doing this, the scientists simultaneously created adenine, guanine, cytosine, uracil, the 4 main organic compounds in RNA, not DNA, which many believe to have been the first molecule to encode genetic information. And for those of us who went through COVID, we remember that the COVID virus is RNA. So if Earth was seeded with life by meteorite impacts, then it follows it's likely that the RNA and DNA throughout at least our galaxy will be the same. So life forms are likely to be similar. We can't say for other galaxies, but probably in our galaxy, they're going to be similar. But now let's look at why is Bhagavan saying what appears to be patently obvious, which is that if something is temporary, it will not remain as permanent. That's why it's called temporary. And if something is permanent, then it won't end. Here he's expanding on verse 12. Remember, he says, "Never was a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings. Nor in the future shall any of us cease to be." So there he was referring to something permanent, that you and I are permanent. And what he's actually pointing out now is that things which people consider permanent are actually temporary. Even having a very, very, very long lifespan doesn't make things permanent. So in a number that is so large that there are 36 zeros after the 10, the universe will have disintegrated into subatomic particles, which themselves, over yet more billions of years, will decay. However, the point here is that even sextillions of years is not eternity. So it's not permanence. So the universe looks very, very long-lived to us compared to a human lifespan. We're thinking that it could span literally sextillions of years, possibly more. That's still not permanent. So Bhagavan is pointing out that Arjun, or all of us, we're basically interesting ourselves constantly in something that's inherently unstable, temporary. The planet Earth will end. The sun, the star that we call the sun, our sun, will die. The entire universe will die. And yet we're constantly interested in all these things that by their very nature are temporary. Equally, he's pointing out that that which is our real self, who we are, exists for all time. No matter how many zeros we add behind the one, we will continue to exist beyond that point. That's what he means by permanence. Now, unfortunately, science today only deals with the material world as yet. So any form of proof or validation of this is really very, very difficult at the current time. However, there's somebody called Dr. Sal Pania, Associate Professor, Department of Medicine at NYU Grossman School of Medicine, and he's been researching this very issue for more than 2 decades now. And he says, based on the largest study of its kind of over 2,000 cardiac arrest patients, 40% had a perception of having some form of awareness during the time when they were in a state of cardiac arrest. So 40%. 10% of participants had a deep mystical experience. Staggeringly, 2% had full visionary and auditory awareness of all the details of what was happening to them at a time when they should have had no awareness. Of these, one case was fully validated. Pania said he could demonstrate that the person was recalling events that were going on for at least 3 to 5 minutes into the period after the heart had stopped, and there should have been, therefore, no awareness. Basically, Professor Pania says this goes against everything science has discovered and thinks so far. And I'm going to quote him. We went into this expecting there not to be any consciousness, awareness, because our scientific models are based upon the fact that you can only have consciousness when your brain is functioning. So that if your brain is going through death and not functioning, then you should not have any of these experiences. He then continues, science also says these so-called experiences are probably not happening when people are really dead. They are probably happening before or after. Still, he said his research proved both wrong. So they were happening when the person was, to all intents and purposes, what we call brain dead. Now, these are very early days yet for such research and for science to explore consciousness. But it's already demonstrated that consciousness continues at least for some very measurable period after what we call clinical death. Now, at this point, the question we should be asking ourselves, we've examined in detail 47 verses of chapter 1, 15 verses of chapter 2. So total so far, 62 verses. I know it's less than 10% of the 700 verses, but still it's 62 verses that was written over 5,000 years ago. And where modern science can validate it, not a single inaccuracy has been found. And we'll see as we continue to go through the Gita that not a single inaccuracy will be found. So let's ask ourselves, given this high level of scientific accuracy, why would Bhagavan suddenly mislead us on this or any other matter, even if current science cannot help us to fully validate the spiritual aspect? Why would he suddenly try to mislead us? He then tells us that all seekers after the truth, that means all our seers, our rishis, have come to the same conclusion. If the conclusion weren't real, then surely the different sages would come to different conclusions. He said, but they have not. What he's pointing out, therefore, is that it's not simply Bhagavan and Sri Krishna telling us this. Thousands of seers and saints would all have to be lying, all of them. And on top of that, telling us the same lie. Okay, they're lying, but why tell the same lie? It's not likely. The statistical chances of that happen to be so exceptionally low, I think we can ignore them. But, of course, you, the listener, will decide based on your own experiences. Let's carry on with 17.
Avinashi tu tadvidhi yena sarvamidam tatam vinasham avyayasya na kaschit kartumarhati. Now one says Avinashi tu tadvidhi. One says tadvidhi means to know. What? Avinashi. One says know that who is Avinashi. Avinashi means indestructible. He says yena sarvam idam tatam. By that, idam means this all. Sarvam idam is this all. Tatam means pervaded. He says vinasam asya yasyasya. Bhagavan says abhyaya. Now word abhyaya, vyaya means can be destructible. Abhyaya means undestructible. So Bhagavan says nobody is there to destroy this abhyaya, means which is indestructible. So Bhagavan says to know that Avinashi, undestructible, because of that this everything has pervaded. So this is what the meaning of this was.
So he now is going on further to explain to Arjuna. He says, know that to be indestructible. So he's moved from the temporary now to the permanent. Know that to be indestructible, which pervades the entire body. No one can cause the destruction of the imperishable Atma. Now, just to help us a little bit, it's difficult to imagine the spiritual. So let's take the help of the physical world that we do know. And let's think back to the two-slit experiment. Why is this helpful? Because the two-slit experiment showed us that all material matter consists of gross matter, what we see, but also an energy component. Now, the first law of thermodynamics tells us that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only change form. Now, let's go a little bit further and look at the most famous equation in the world. I think there's hardly anybody who doesn't know it. It says E equals mc squared. Remember Einstein's equation. E equals mc squared tells us that energy and matter are equivalent. Remember, E equals energy, m is the mass of an object, and c is the speed of light. So energy can basically convert to matter and matter to energy, like when we burn a lump of coal. However, the destruction of the matter only results in energy, and the destruction of the energy results in matter. But the energy cannot be destroyed, it can merely change form. So it changes from the lump of coal into smoke and ash, but the energy remains. And for those who are science buffs, here's the full equation, which was modified by Professor Paul Dirac in 1928, is E squared equals mc squared squared plus pc squared. I don't think we need to worry too much about the equation. He merely modified it for objects which have no mass, such as photons. But it doesn't change the analysis above in any way. So Sri Krishna is telling us that the spiritual energy or consciousness that powers us is similarly indestructible. It can merely change form. And he'll come to that aspect in a later verse. Verse 18.
Antavanta ime deha nityasya saririnaha anashino prameyasya tasmad yudhyasva bharata. Bhagavan says, ime deha antavanta. Bhagavan says, these all bodies are antavanta. They have end. Nityasya uktaha saririnaha. Shariri is who owns sharir. That means who owns the body. Sariri means Atma. So he says Nityasya Uktaha. So it says this body is having these all bodies which has end. Now for Shariri means which for Atma, Bhagavan is using different adjectives. He says Anashinaha. Anashinaha means indestructible. Aprameyasya, immeasurable. And Bhagavan, because of that, Bhagavan says, Tasmad yudhyasva bharat. He says, you are, as Arjuna say, that, oh, once my all this family, once they will be destroyed, or once they will be killed. So Bhagavan is answering for that. He says, whatever the Atma is there, that is indestructible. So because of that, Tasmad yudhyasva bharat. Hey Bharata means, hey Arjun, Tasmad yudhyasva. That's why you have to fight, because they want to be destroyed.
So Bhagavan says, only the material body is perishable. So this is perishable, he's saying, for any creature. But the embodied Atma, in English, the closest words are soul or spirit, but they're not really good equivalents, so let's stick to Atma. He says the embodied Atma within is indestructible, immeasurable, and eternal. Therefore fight, O descendant of Bharat. So Bhagavan once more is reiterating to Arjuna that yes, of course, the material body is temporary. And it will therefore, no matter what action Arjuna takes or fails to take, it will perish. There's no option on that one. So this verse is one that is very easily misunderstood. To conclude that Bhagavan is therefore saying it's fine to kill somebody because their body will die anyway. Well, how can this possibly be Bhagavan speaking? First, let's recap. We've already looked at Arjuna's reluctance to fight. We can cross-refer to chapter 1, verses 36 to 37. And research, remember, shows very few men are innately bellicose. The psychiatrists Roy Swank and Walter Marchand found that 98% of soldiers who endured 60 days of continuous combat suffered psychiatric symptoms, either temporary or permanent, but they suffered psychiatric symptoms. So in this context, let's examine Bhagavan's statement, therefore fight. First, Bhagavan is speaking of a warrior, a soldier. He's not speaking to the rest of us. Should they fight? Now, history shows us that animals and human beings use violence to obtain what they want. Unfortunately, it's a part of history. There's something called an ancient massacre, which was unearthed near Lake Turkana in Kenya. The event occurred 10,000 years ago and is probably the first evidence we have of a massacre. The dead, it says, included male and female adults as well as children. So we need to ask ourselves, if the attacked had had any soldiers, wouldn't their duty have been to fight and protect the people precisely to prevent such a massacre? Now let's go back to verse 3 and Chris Walsh's research, where he says cowardice is an evolutionary response to fear. It's part of our flight or fight response, he says. When faced with something frightening, our natural inclination is to flee. And this is often the most prudent response, maybe the most prudent response. Yet the preservation of society requires that when our group is threatened, we stay and challenge the danger. We do our duty to others and expect that others will do theirs, even if it will not directly benefit us. Cowardice, he says, is an affront to the norm. So we are not expected to be cowards. When our group is threatened, when innocent people are threatened, then those who are soldiers are there to protect them and therefore need to fight, which is what Bhagavan is saying. So Shri Krishna is saying that Arjun's duty is to fight because his people will be under attack. Secondly, Bhagavan is talking in the context of a just war. Duryodhana's was not a just war. In other words, to try to steal other people's property would not be considered a just war, and Bhagavan would never defend or advocate it. He's talking in the context of a just war where Arjun and the Pandavas and all the other soldiers on their side are defending what is right, number one, and two, what happens to be theirs. So most people, let's look at modern history. Is there any war or fight we can think is justified and is just? And I think most people would agree that the war the British Navy fought to stop slave ships was a just war. In 1808, Britain passed the Act for the Abolition of the Slave Trade. Right after that, the British Royal Navy established the West Africa Squadron at substantial expense. Remember, slavery at that time was still legal in the United States, Canada, Latin America, and France, and many other countries. This squadron's task was to suppress the Atlantic slave trade by patrolling the coast of West Africa. It's one of the rare examples of a war fought for no benefit at all to the nation that fought it, and at considerable expense to itself and its navy. At a cost of 1,587 Navy personnel who died, they seized 1,600 ships involved in the slave trade. They freed 150,000 Africans who were aboard the vessels between 1807 and 1860. Then, under very great pressure from Britain, the United States Navy assisted the West Africa Squadron, starting in 1820 with USS Cyane, which the US had captured from the Royal Navy in 1815. Initially, the US contribution consisted of a few ships, which comprised the Africa Squadron. At this time, remember, slavery was still legal in the US. Now, in such a just war, to save hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children, Bhagavan would certainly say that fighting such a war and killing the enemy was fully justified. Not only fully justified, necessary. But the frame of mind in which the soldier should do so is something Bhagavan will come to in later verses and chapters. He's not saying it should be done with anger, with hatred, with malice, with resentment. But we'll come to that in later chapters. Right now, all he's saying is that this is a war for that which is right and should be fought. So I think from what I've said, it's perfectly clear that in no way would Bhagavan say that murder is justified. It's not. It's a punishable offense. Spiritually, then, he says, the perishable body has been killed and can do no further harm. The Atma is not killed, even of the person doing evil, who needs to be killed in a just war, but that Atma, he said, is not killed. In a material context, when an atom is exploded, the atom has perished. But remember that its terrible energy has certainly not been killed, as the inhabitants of Hiroshima and Nagasaki found out. Only the atom has perished, not its energy. Similarly, when we perish, our body perishes, that which is our energy, he says, does not perish. Verse 19.
य एनं वेत्ति हन्तारं यश्चैनं मन्यते हतम् उभौ तौ न विजानीतो नायं हन्ति न हन्यते. So now one is saying there are two kinds of different mindset. He says, ya enam vetti hantaram. First one, he says, the person who thinks or who knows that this is the slayer. Second is, ya enam manyate hatam, or thinks that it can be slain. Bhagavan says, ubhau tau na vijanito. Both of those mindsets, they don't know that this cannot be killer or this cannot be killed. Ya na ayam hanti, na ayam hanyate. So one says that it cannot be killed or who is not a killer. So the two kinds of mindset, one says they both don't know. So this is the meaning.
So Bhagavan says, neither the one who thinks the Atma can slay and the one who thinks the Atma can be slain has knowledge. In other words, he's saying neither of them know the truth. For truly the Atma neither kills nor can it be killed. So having said that all material things perish, Bhagavan is now reiterating and expanding on the qualities of the Atma, which he says cannot be killed because it's eternal. But now Bhagavan has introduced another quality of the Atma, which is that neither can it kill. The Atma is an energy, it cannot kill. In this verse, he doesn't explain that any further. He stops at saying the Atma cannot kill. The comparison with energy in material nature ends here. So while it is true that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, we certainly cannot say that material energy does not kill. Clearly, an excess of material energy kills, whether it's X-rays, the power of the atomic bomb, heat from a fire, or a laser beam. So what does it mean the Atma cannot kill? We will have to wait for later verses to find out. Let's explore further. Verse 20.
This is very famous verse. न जायते म्रियते वा कदाचित् नायं भूत्वा भविता वा न भूयः अजो नित्यः शाश्वतोऽयं पुराणो न हन्यते हन्यमाने शरीरे. Bhagavan says, na jayate. It doesn't take birth. There is no birth. Mriyate. It doesn't die. Kadachit na ayam bhutva. Even it once it is existed, or it will be, or it will again. So in the meaning of that, you will understand more. But Bhagavan says, ajaha. What is this Atma? Bhagavan says, it is, number one is ajaha. He says, it has no birth. Then he says, nityaha. Nityaha, which is eternal. Then he says, shashvataha. Shashvataha means which is beyond time. Ayam purana. In Sanskrit, Purana word is beautiful. Puranam is, in some scriptures also we call Puranam. So Puranam, which is, it looks old, but it is new. So this is called Pura api navam. Even though it is old or it looks old, but it is new. So that is called Puranaha. And now Bhagavan says, na hanyate hanyamane sharire. Even though hanyamanaha shariraha, that means if one body is killed or destroyed, na hanyate, this Atma doesn't get destroyed. So that is what I mean.
We'll see throughout the Gita Absolutely beautiful and spectacular verses from Bhagwan. And to me, this is one of them. He basically says, the Atma is unborn, undying, nor having once existed does it ever cease to be. The Atma is without birth, eternal, beyond time, and ageless. It is not destroyed when the body is destroyed. Very beautiful verse, explains the nature of the Atma. It says, birthless, deathless, unchanging, even beyond time, it remains unchanged when the body perishes. Let's see how this links to verse 12. Remember, he says, there was never a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. Now, very often people ask, well, why didn't he only refer to all these kings? Because he was on a battlefield and at that point was surrounded by kings. But of course, it applies to all beings, that the Atma is unborn, undying, and ageless. If there was never a time when we did not exist, then clearly the Atma was never created. That's one very important difference between the concept of the Atma and the soul. So the Atma was never created, it always was. Nor did it ever take birth. Now, at a material plane, Western science has moved a very long way away from the days when they thought the sun and the other stars, remember, revolved around the earth in a sphere. In the 17th century, there was a physicist, Tycho de Brahe, in Denmark. He proposed that the moon and the sun revolve around the earth and that Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn revolve around the sun. All around is a sphere of stars which rotates. The Bhagavad Puran, however, always postulated multiple universes. In 6.16.37, so those of you who want to look it up, let me repeat, 6.16.37 says there are innumerable universes besides this one. And although they are large without limits, they move about like atoms in you. Therefore, you are known as the unlimited, Ananta. Now, there are two issues here we need to look at. One is that even the material universe is eternal in one context, which Bhagavad says the Atma also is. Second is there an infinite number of universes. Now, I know you will say, well, how can the universe be eternal? You just said it'll die in sextillions of years. But the whole point is the Bhagavatam says that there are a multitude of universes that consistently exist. And we'll come in later chapters to examine that concept. Science is the same now. It's a cycle. So there are always universes that exist, universes that are being dissolved, and then more universes come. So basically what he's saying is that the material world of universes is eternal. It's an eternal cycle. It doesn't mean that this particular universe will continue forever. That's not what he means. So now let's look at the first issue. One theory is the cyclic universe. There are several models. What they all share in common is the postulate, that the universe follows infinite, indefinite, self-sustaining cycles. One such theory is put forward by Roger Penrose. Emeritus Rouse Ball Professor of Mathematics at the University of Oxford, Nobel laureate, so we think he can be taken pretty seriously. If the universe is eternal, it means it was never created, nor can it ever die. It can change form, but it cannot be created or die. Remember, the underlying energy is not changing form. The material aspect of it is changing form. Remember verse 22, Bhagavan will come to the issue of the Atma seeming to change form. We'll come to that in due course. There are so many theories today, but almost all accept that there is more than one universe. In a new study, Stanford physicists Andrei Lind and Vitaly Vanchurin, they calculated the number of all possible universes as 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 7. Now, this is a number so large that Excel cannot calculate it. It just says error. So it's about as close as possible to scientists saying that the number of universes is infinite. 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 10 is 1 with 306 zeros after it. Well, I hope this number, if you want to write that down on a piece of paper and put a 1 and then keep writing 306 zeros after it, look at it, and if it means something to you, that's very good, because certainly we're unable to comprehend it at all. And remember, this is before we have now taken that number with 306 zeros and done that to the power of 7, which we can't calculate. So what science is showing us is that even the world outside, the world which is perceived by the senses, it's infinite and eternal. We are part of that world or universe. It's not logical then to suppose that although everything that our senses can see, hear, smell, touch, taste is eternal, somehow we ourselves are something less than that. Bhagavad therefore confirms the obvious logic that our real self, our Atma, is also eternal. He's also saying in the spiritual context that he is infinite, as is the Atma. So we are something that we're unable to comprehend, just as we're unable to comprehend what is 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 7. Just because we're unable to comprehend it doesn't mean the number does not exist. It does exist, expressed as 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 7. Well, that number, whatever it is, does exist. We're simply not able to comprehend it. Our minds cannot take it in. It's so large. So similarly, because we cannot comprehend the Atma, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So to summarize, the world we perceive has 2 dimensions. That which we're able to perceive with our senses, like a molecule, an atom, objects around us, and that which we are unable to perceive with our senses, which is its energy. That was shown by the 2-slit experiment, but when we look around us, we don't normally see, I'm looking into a camera now, well, I don't see a camera and its energy wave, I just see the camera. So it's just something that our senses cannot perceive. All our senses can perceive is, I'm looking at a camera. But that doesn't change the fact that there's also an energy wave accompanying the camera. So we too have 2 dimensions, a body which we're able to perceive, that which is temporary, and the Atma, which we can think of as the equivalent to wave energy, which is permanent. Should we do 21?
21.
Yes.
Veda vinashinam nityam ya enam ajamabhyayam katham sapurusah partha kam ghatayati hantikam. Bhagavan says, Veda avinashinam. So in previous verse, as we say, he is repeating again those 4 adjectives of Atma. He says Veda. No. What is the first is avinashinam, which is indestructible. Nityam, which is eternal. Ajam, which is unborn. Avyayam, imperishable. So Bhagavan says these are the 4 adjectives of Atma, the nature of Atma. And now he is saying that katham sapurusha partha. So Bhagavan is also asking that how that person can kill or that Atma can be killed. So Bhagavan says, Bhagavan is saying that how can that person can kill someone or it can be caused to kill something. So this is what Bhagavan is asking, because the Atma has this 4 nature of Avinashi, Nityam, Ajam and Avyayam.
So he says, O Parth, son of Pritha, it was Kunti, how can one who knows the Atma to be imperishable, eternal, unborn, and immutable kill anyone or cause anyone to kill? So now, having explained the Atma is indestructible, Bhagavan is asking the logical question, how can it kill anyone or cause anyone to kill? So now again, this is another verse which can be misunderstood. Is Bhagavan now saying that it's a license to go ahead and kill anybody and then say, I didn't kill anything, I'm the Atma? No, not at all. The critical words we must look at are one who knows the Atma to be imperishable, eternal, unborn and immutable. So it's one who has that knowledge and a full understanding of it. Such a person with that knowledge has a number of other attributes which Bhagavan will explain in later verses and in other chapters, which means they would be incapable of doing harm to any other creature or even to an inanimate object for any personal gain or for any irrational purpose. So verse 22.
This is a famous verse. Vasansi jirnani yatha vihaya navani grihnati naro parani tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani sanyati navani dehi. Bhagavan says vasansi jirnani. Vasansi is clothes or garments. Jirnani, when it gets old. Yatha vihaya, then you leave it. And navani gruhnati naro parani. Bhagavan says then anyone is going to go with new clothes. So once you have old clothes, you remove old clothes and wear new clothes. Same way, tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani sanyati navani dehi. Dehi. Again, dehi means who owns deha, who owns body, which is atma. So dehi means atma. Bhagavan says atma also changes sharirani, bodies, and goes into new body as you change your clothes. So this is what the meaning of this.
Another very famous verse, very nice example Bhagavan takes. He says, as a person sheds worn out garments and wears new ones, likewise at the time of death, the Atma casts off its worn out body and enters a new one. Again, he's giving a very comprehensible example of the Atma taking another form and simply looking different. Now let's try to understand this again, going back to the two-slit experiment, the famous experiment, which is very useful in understanding some of these concepts. And you remember that in that experiment, we saw that the photon, which has no mass, an electron, an atom, a molecule consisting of 400 atoms, and another consisting of 2,000 atoms, all created the same interference pattern on a screen at the other end. However, to our senses, they all look completely different, and they appear to have completely different characteristics. So although all creatures exist in the Paramatma, and the Paramatma exists in them, they merely look different to us, and that's what we'll come to in later chapters, the unity of all creation. Similarly, Bhagavan is telling us now the Atma is exactly the same in all creatures. It merely looks different to our senses. It's no different than if our mother today wears a red dress with red lipstick and tomorrow she wears a yellow dress with pink lipsticks. It's the same person, but she really does look very different, although she's the same. So when we die, he says, the Atma takes off the worn-out garment, the body which has now failed, and it wears a new body, a new garment. Verse 23.
Yeah. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakaha, nachainam kledayantyapo, nasho shayati marutaha. Now Bhagavan says, na enam chindanti. Enam means to Atma. Chindanti. Bhagavan says, nobody can shred. Nainam dahati pavakaha. Pavaka is fire. Dahati means burn. So fire cannot burn it. Nainam dahati pavakaha. Nachainam kledayanti apaha. Apaha is water. Kledayanti is to make it wet. So Bhagavan says, water cannot wet this Atma. And then nasho shayati marutaha. Maruta is a wind. Bhagavan says that wind cannot even dry. So Bhagavan is here. Bhagavan shows the four different, as we said, the elements. So Bhagavan shows that these cannot change Atma. Number one is Shastra cannot shred, means weapons cannot shred. Fire cannot burn. Water cannot make it wet. And a wind cannot dry. And now they all are in nicely ordered. I think Yogi explained. It is nicely ordered. First, Bhagavan starts with weapons, then goes to fire, then goes to water, and then wind.
So this is one of the many beautiful verses coming up describing the Atma. Let's just do this one today. Weapons cannot shred the Atma, nor can fire burn it. Water cannot wet it, nor can the wind dry it. Beautiful verse. But how can there be anything that weapons cannot harm, fire cannot burn, water cannot wet, or the wind dry? We'll look at that in a minute. But first, let's note, in the middle of the battlefield, the very precise logical order in which Bhagavan speaks. First, he mentions weapons. Fire, the second item, can burn these. Then he mentions water, the third item, which can quench the second item, the fire. Then he mentions the wind, the fourth item, which can dry the third item, water. It's a very precise logical order in which Bhagavan speaks, and we will note this throughout the Gita as we read it. His very great precision. Now, all of these, of course, can destroy the body, but to destroy it completely, we cremate and set fire to the body. The fire in turn releases smoke and clouds, which in turn cause rain and wind. Now, who would have spoken with such precision and exact logic, extempore, in the midst of a battlefield? And that's why we call him the Paramatma. Now, Bhagavan was careful to try to provide us with examples that we can actually understand, something which our eyes can see, which we can see every day happening, and which cause these very qualities, which have these very qualities. So first, think of a beam of light. One, weapons cannot harm it. So try lunging at a beam of light with as many weapons as we want. Not even an atomic bomb will change the beam of light. It just carries on. First, it will light up a city. Next, it will light up rubble. But the beam of light remains exactly the same. The Atma is the same. It remains untouched. Fire, he says, then cannot burn it. So lighting a fire under a beam of light will do nothing to the beam of light at all. Now, we don't suggest you try this at home. Please don't have a beam of light coming through a window and start lighting fires under it. But I think it's obvious that nothing will happen to that beam of light if you did. So similarly, Bhagavan is telling us that lighting a fire, which consumes the body, as we do when we shed the body, will do nothing at all to the Atma. It will carry on. Then he says, water cannot wet it. So if we point a beam of light at water, it may be completely absorbed. Some may be reflected, some refracted, depending on the angle of the beam. But the number of photons in the beam remains unchanged. Basically, nothing has happened to the beam of light. Now, during absorption, reflection, or refraction, while the photons remain intact, the water doesn't remain intact. The recipient of that beam of light doesn't remain intact. Because depending on the intensity of the beam, the energy absorbed might cause the water, for example, to heat. But in the same way, the Atma basically remains unchanged. Nothing happens to it. Then he says the wind does not dry it. Now, I think most people will agree that we can start a hurricane against a beam of light and it will not even shift its direction. The Atma has the same quality. No matter what it's faced with, nothing will happen to it. Because the Atma is something which our five senses cannot begin to perceive or understand, Bhagavan is trying to give us examples which we can well understand, which starts to give us a clue as to its nature, and therefore our nature. What are we? On that note, we will stop for today, and next week we will carry on with verse 24, where Bhagavan continues to talk about the Atma and to try and describe it in a way that we can understand it. But thank you very much for listening. Namaste.
Namaste.
Jai Shri
Jai
Krishna.
Shri Krishna.
See you in the next session. We hope you enjoyed this one.